I'm Jennifer Mascia, senior news writer and founding staffer at The Trace.
I'm Tatyana Turner, an editing fellow at The Trace. What is the significance of June 18th? Why did The Trace launch on that day?
We were supposed to launch on June 22nd, 2015, which was a Monday. And we'd been preparing for several months. We had a backlog of stories ready to go. And then on June 17th was the Charleston church shooting, and it was devastating. We decided to move up the launch because we just all sat in that little room, all seven of us, and we looked at each other and we said, we can't just sit here.
Right.
Because of that, for me, the Charleston shooting and the Trace's launch will forever be linked and will forever be bittersweet. The fact that the Trace is even necessary is a sad fact to me. Although I'm proud to be here and I'm proud to have helped start it, I wish we didn't need to exist.
Absolutely. Honestly, I think this is a good segue to my next question for you, which is how did you get involved with The Trace? Because you were there before the .org, right?
Yeah, I had been reporting on gun violence at the New York Times. I was assisting a columnist who, after Sandy Hook, had been very upset by America's gun violence epidemic and wanted to see who was getting shot every day. So we did a 16-month project, and I learned a lot about gun violence in America. And that attracted some notice, and funders started coming forward. And, the opportunity arose to start a nonprofit news outlet. We had no idea how it was going to be received. We really just put one foot in front of the other. And I had no idea that I was going to get involved in gun violence journalism. The field did not exist when I was at the Times reporting on this. So in a way, we've all been part of the creation of an entirely new beat in journalism. And that's something to really be proud of.
Absolutely. And now I actually have a follow-up question for you, which is how do you think The Trace stands out from those other publications like the New York Times, like ProPublica?
Yeah, I mean, there are outlets doing incredible work. The Times does incredible work. ProPublica, when they write about guns, it's a wonderful, deeply researched, thoughtful investigation. But they do it piecemeal, understandably. The Times is the paper of record. They're covering the world. What we're able to do is just really have that laser-like focus. And when you're able to do that, you see that the gun beat touches all the other beats. But the truth is, if we had three traces, we still wouldn't be able to fully cover the issue because it's just so massive and so vast. And we've tripled our staff since we launched. And yet, we could triple it again and, have 15 investigations in the mix. This beat is just that massive.
I'm even thinking about the way that you've been described, The Trace, in the early stages when there were about, 7 posts a day to when you go to the website right now, there are long form stories. There are these rich stories. So how did The Trace get from those daily posts to what we have now?
We started out by covering everything. So I would cover domestic violence, community violence. We would all get a taste of the beat, and that helped us focus. So if you notice, for instance, Mike Spees, he started, writing more often, gun owners, hunters. He was a little bit about the NRA. And then as you see over the years, he starts focusing and honing in to where he's doing 2 deeply researched investigations a year on the NRA. We were able to start out general and really refine to the point where, as an organization, we learned much more about the topic. And then we were able to pick and choose and say, we're not going to weigh in on this. We're going to wait and do a longer story because we don't have to publish every day, because our job is to bring the day 2 story on day 1, the day 2 context on day 1. And that's, where we're really able to thrive.
And with The Trace, I'm very curious. How did The Trace get its name?
So I actually dug some of these up. I remember at the time, the one I liked the most was Gunpoint, which there were a lot. I'm going to warn you, there are a lot of gun puns. So I really liked Gunpoint, like at gunpoint. It was kind of like viewpoint, but, so I just kind of liked that. That was our main contender for a while. And then I looked at the second round finalists, Gun Intel, which sounds like an FBI, Gun Watch, which kind of sounds like a watchdog site, Gun Matters, like Cal Matters, I guess, Gun Decoder, which sounds like a comic book, Gun Sense, which is actually a term now that's been used in the gun violence prevention movement quite a bit. But back then it was new. But it sounds a little advocacy. And we were all journalists, so we didn't want that. Point Blank, one word, capitalized B, Point Blank. Standpoint, and Revolve.
Huh.
So those are some of the, and then the ones that we also flirted with, Shots Fired, Bulletproof. I don't know why we would use that, but those are some of the things. And then we picked randomly. Somebody said, "What about the trace?" And this was after months of brainstorming, and we were tired of brainstorming. We've been brainstorming from like October to March, and all of a sudden we looked at each other and said, that sounds great. Why didn't we think of that before? And we thought about it like, the trace, like an investigation, getting to the bottom of something. Then there's also like a gun trace. But we really liked that it wasn't explicitly a gun term. It could also be a journalism term. And
Reporting on this beat, is there anything that surprised you along the way?
guns are so much a part of the national identity, the way they've been used to subjugate minorities, what they mean as symbols to the insurrectionists who are marching on the Capitol. It's the story of America, really.
Let me ask you, I'm going to take you back 10 years again. Can you tell me about what the mission was then for the trace, and I guess your outlook then versus what it is today, given all that's happened in between?
Well, in our inaugural post, we said that we wanted to combat a scarcity of knowledge about this topic through journalism. And I think that we very much are on mission. We wanted to cut through the noise of the gun debate and find the answers no matter what they were and no matter who they served. And I definitely think we've done that because we have readers from all over the political spectrum. When I get a gun rights supporter writing in an email to me saying, you know what, actually your article was fair, it's like I'm on cloud nine, because that's the whole point, was to cut through the noise and reach as many people as possible. And so we said that we were going to be shaped by our core values, which were accuracy, fairness, empathy, and doggedness. And I definitely think that we've made a lot of strides when it comes to empathy. Trauma-informed journalism was not really a thing when we launched. It was in its beginning. Journalists were just starting to talk about that. And now we are so conscientious about not naming a mass killer, being sensitive of victims' families' needs, over getting the interview. We really have recalibrated along those values.
Going to your point too about some of the decisions that were made, like not naming the shooter, what were some of the inspirations behind some of the decisions, or like what are some other ones that shaped the way that the coverage is right now?
At first, we really thought that we operated as if we were like a daily news publication. So, we named the shooter on day one. You have to put out the information. A story's unfolding. This is like for a breaking news event. And, we're doing our due diligence as reporters. But then about 5 years in, a movement really started to take off in mainstream media called No Notoriety. And this was started by parents of a victim of the 2012 Aurora movie theater shooting in Colorado. And, they managed to convince Anderson Cooper of CNN. They spoke with him, and CNN actually changed some of their policies after this.
And then when you think about the audience, whether they've been around since the very beginning 10 years ago or prospective audience, what is your message to them?
We definitely have newsletter subscribers, I'm sure, who've been around since the beginning, and sources everywhere who've been with us since the beginning. And thank you for taking us seriously. And thank you for giving us a chance. A lot of people accused us of being advocates. Every single one of us was a journalist. When we were hired, many of us went to journalism school. And so we really were hoping that people didn't see us as advocates, because when you're viewed as advocates, you're viewed as, you've made up your mind already. And journalism is about listening. And so thank you for taking us seriously.
Yeah. And going back to, your personal journey at the Trace, and again, thinking about this beat, that it can shake someone, right? Reading the coverage and also putting it together, it can be unnerving. So how do you find peace in that? Where do you find your sense of peace or sanity? How do you find grounding?
I take long cleansing bike rides around New York, 20 miles at a clip, either after work or on the weekends. And it really helps me recalibrate, and sometimes shakes loose story ideas, because when you're just riding and taking the world in, things start popping into your brain, and it's a nice reset. That's the way I cope.
And when you think about your own reporting, or even about the Trace in the next 10 years, what do you picture?
Wow. I wish that gun deaths would go so low that funders would just be like, there's no need for you anymore. That's probably not going to happen. I always like to tell people in Canada and Australia, my job doesn't exist in Europe. So I would love to get to a point where we're not necessary. The next 10 years, I think, to be honest, I know the trace will be here. I hope. I really don't know. God, we're going to keep doing what we do. I don't know what's going to happen with gun violence in America, but we are going to keep doing what we do, which is report what's happening, report why people think it's happening, and report how it could be stopped if everything is working as it should. We are going to continue combating misinformation books. We're laying down this draft of history. Maybe someday, when the solutions are within reach, people will look back and see what we did.
I really do believe they will. Um,
Well, your generation has the hope, and mine has the cynicism. So, yeah.
and in bridging that, I think that I want to ask you, I'm fairly new to the trace. This is going to be my third month, and I want to know from you what are some things that I need to know about this beat, about the trace, and even, stepping into this role as editor. What are some nuggets you have to offer on?
Don't feel overwhelmed. There's stuff I have to look up every day. It's impossible to know this entire beat. I have a doc that I constantly refer to because I have so many stats in my mind. There's no way I can keep them all straight. And I've learned just have humility about that. It's all about everyday learning. I learn something new on this beat every single day. Just be open to learning and you'll do fine.
Thank you for that. I think
Yeah.
that is very great advice. And I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
And this is, and like just bridging everything, all of the 10 years together. And you think back to even your very first byline to your most recent piece. That's countless number of words, right? And if you
Yeah.
imagine it just like all in one place, like in a book, for example, who would you dedicate that to?
Oh my God. Wow. That is a great question. Wow. That is a really good question. Let me think about it for a second. There's so many people. The first thing I think of selfishly is my parents. They had very strong ideas about the proliferation of guns in America. Even my father, who had had a criminal past, thought there were way too many guns. And he died in 2001. So he was talking about the 80s and 90s, not even today. There are a lot of guns today. But that's my selfish answer. The answer, I think, would be to the families of victims of gun violence. I've interviewed so many, and it's a club that nobody wants to join, the mothers, really. And I think about all the people who are alive today who are not going to be tomorrow, the next day, and they have no idea because a lot of times these are sudden deaths. I think about that all the time. So, really, the families who are going to be grieving and don't even realize it. That doesn't make for that's a very morbid book dedication, but really to the families who are going to have to endure this and to the families who already have.